December 7th, 1862. Hour after hour, watching Herron's men battle an unseen foe in the trees atop a lonely grove, the veteran soldiers of the 37th Illinois anxiously wait to join the fray. At 3 p.m., John C. Black, the lieutenant colonel of the regiment, receives orders to join the fight. With a chilling order to march sounded, the Illinoisans move towards the ominous grove, passing over the dead and dying of those who have gone in before them. With every step they take, their hearts begin to pump faster, filling their bodies with adrenaline and their minds spinning with thoughts of what might be over the ridge. Reaching the base of the hill, the atmosphere goes eerily silent as the shaken Illinoisans scale the grove. Once they reach the top, they come upon Borden's orchard. Calling the regiment to a halt, Black and his men peer through the drifting smoke, hoping to catch a glimpse of their waiting foe. Then, the deafening silence is consumed by an ear-piercing rebel yell. The waiting rebels rise and unleash their guns upon Black and his regiment as the Battle of Prairie Grove kicks off once again. Halloween, 1862. While leisurely resting in Fayetteville, Brigadier General John M. Schofield receives alarming reports of Major General Thomas C. Hindman marching upon the town with overwhelming strength. Alarmed, Schofield prepares his men for a Confederate assault. Luckily, the phantom force haunting his men is nowhere to be seen. Relieved but mortified, Schofield calls the incursion into northern Arkansas to an end. When the orders arrive, all three federal divisions march north back into friendlier territory. By November 6, only Brigadier General James G. Blunt remains in Arkansas, while the two Missouri divisions camp north of the border. Just as the Federals thought they had finally gained some respite, word gets back from General-in-Chief Henry W. Halleck, who intends to send the Missouri Division east to support Major General Ulysses S. Grant in his efforts against Vicksburg. Annoyed, the two Missouri divisions march towards Springfield to begin their transfer east. Schofield, who's excited for a change of scenery, suddenly falls ill and is bedridden. Unable to leave his room, the command of the two divisions falls to Brigadier General James Taunton, who coordinates the movement east. However, on November 14th, just as Taunton leads the Missouri divisions towards Helena, word gets back from Blunt. The rebels are on the move. While Major General Samuel R. Curtis is shuffling the federal divisions in Missouri, Hindman sees an opportunity to forage in the bountiful land around Cane Hill and dispatches Brigadier General John S. Marmaduke with 2,000 of his troopers to the region. When reports get back to Curtis of the Confederate activities, he suspends the transfer of the Missouri Division and turns them around on November 17th. But just as Taunton's Missourians near Springfield, Marmaduke pulls out of his exposed position and rejoins Hindman. Hearing of the success of Marmaduke's foraging expedition and convinced that the two Missouri divisions have marched out of the picture, Hindman believes this to be his best opportunity to strike north into Missouri. With his front opening up, Hindman makes the finishing touches on his newly christened Trans-Mississippi Army. This hodgepodge force of 17,000 men is the best Hindman could muster in this severely depleted region of the Confederacy. The army consists of four roughly equal-sized divisions, one cavalry, two infantry, and one mixed. Though more numerous than their federal counterpart, the Confederates are lacking in almost every department. With only a few rifles found in the army, most men are armed with smoothbore muskets and shotguns. Just like their small arms, their artillery is composed of outdated small pieces that will struggle to compete with the Federals' vast array of modern guns. At that very moment, as Hindman is about to march north, President Jefferson Davis orders Lieutenant General Theophilus H. Holmes to reinforce Vicksburg. Just like the Federals, the Confederates are scrounging around for forces to send to the threatened bastion on the Mississippi. President Davis promises that the men sent will be returned once the crisis afflicting Vicksburg ends. But Holmes, unable to forego an opportunity to retake Missouri, refuses to send troops to Pemberton's aid. With the coast clear, Hindman orders his forces to move out. On November 23rd, Hindman sends Marmaduke with the commissary train back to Cane Hill. When Marmaduke returns to the region, he learns from scouts that Blunt's Kansas division is in a bad condition and is ripe for capture. Convinced that Blunt is vulnerable, Marmaduke urges Hindman to race north and neutralize the only Federal force blocking their path back into Missouri. Once Hindman receives Marmaduke's report, he intensifies the preparations for their march north. But still, even with rushing his preparations, it will be a few days before the rest of his force can get moving. Till then, Hindman urges Marmaduke to use caution until the bulk of the army arrives. Not worried whatsoever, Marmaduke assures his commander there is no danger at Cane Hill by declaring, "All is quiet here." On November 24th, Blunt receives reports that Marmaduke has returned to Cane Hill. Instead of hunkering down like last time, Blunt is itching for a fight and prepares his men to advance upon the enemy. Informing Curtis of his impending attack, Blunt tells his commander, "I shall move on Marmaduke tomorrow morning. I hope to destroy him before he can be reinforced by Hindman." To ensure he succeeds, Curtis orders Brigadier General Francis J. Herron, now commanding in Totten's place, to move the two Missouri divisions to a supporting distance. With his force ready, Blunt moves out with 5,000 men to strike Marmaduke on November 27th. The next day, just as Marmaduke is making plans to raid Elkhorn Tavern, Blunt's force arrives and strikes the stunned Confederate horsemen. Unable to hold their position at Cane Hill, the rebels run with the Federals close on their tail. For almost 2 miles, the two sides exchange fire with each other until darkness ends the fighting. Keeping just ahead of the Federals, the rebels are able to escape with only light casualties, turning Blunt's hopeful surprise attack into an inconclusive battle. Satisfied that his force has driven Marmaduke away and captured the field, Blunt makes Cane Hill's new base of operation. While Marmaduke, though embarrassed about being pushed out of Cane Hill, is happy to have saved the army's commissary train. When Hindman receives reports of the fight, he sees an opportunity in this setback. With Blunt's attack and capture of Cane Hill, the Federal force is even closer to Hindman's army than before, and even further away from support. Convinced they can easily bag Blunt, Hindman makes plans for his own attack. On November 30th, Hindman and his subordinates hammer out a plan to attack and double envelop Blunt's force. With his plan set, Hindman informs Holmes of his impending move and spends 3 days finalizing his preparations to attack Blunt. Finally, on December 3rd, 1862, the 12,000-man Trans-Mississippi Army breaks camp and moves north to destroy Blunt's Kansas division amid freezing winter rain. Unbeknownst to Hindman, Blunt is more than aware of Confederate intentions. Even before the Confederates move north, Blunt is all but certain of their eventual advance. Knowing his small force cannot take on Hindman's entire army, he calls on Herron and the two Missouri divisions for assistance. However, Herron and his Missourians are over 100 miles north of Blunt, across the Boston Mountains over broken, uninhabited country. Realizing the importance of facing Hindman together, Herron pushes his Missourians at breakneck speed to arrive on time. But until Herron arrives, Blunt fortifies his position and declares to Curtis, "I expect an attack tomorrow morning, but shall not abandon my position without a fight." On December 5th, Hindman's offensive is unfolding according to plan, but not according to schedule. Due to the incessant freezing rain chilling his men and turning roads into a quagmire, the Confederates are behind on their expected arrival. This delay forces Hindman to postpone his attack until the 7th. On December 6th, the Confederate vanguard runs into Federal cavalrymen, but they easily push them back and proceed. Though the two sides have finally come into contact, Hindman believes he still has enough time to attack and destroy Blunt's command before Herron arrives. Yet, Just as the Confederates are bedding down to get some sleep, worrying news arrives. Herron will be here tomorrow. Over the past 4 days, Herron and his Missouri division have incredibly marched 110 miles through the broken terrain of the Boston Mountains amidst freezing rain and muddy roads. Knowing that Blunt's only hope of surviving is a race to his assistance, Herron drives his men as fast as humanly possible. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph D. Barnes of the 20th Iowa believed it to be the greatest march made by any troops during the War of the Rebellion. Not wasting any time, the men in the Missouri Division marched an average of 30 miles a day to ensure they arrived to rescue Blunt. Thanks to their Herculean efforts, they arrived just as Hindman is about to attack. Realizing that if he strikes Blunt now with Herron fast approaching, his attack will only force a merger of the two Federal forces. Refusing the retreat and unwilling to let his enemies link up, Hindman revises his plan to isolate Blunt at Cane Hill and attack Herron as his wary columns reach the area. If he can defeat Herron, he can backtrack and deal with Blunt. Looking at his map, Hindman finds the best place to get in between the two Federal forces, and that place is a locally known forested hill called Prairie Grove, located a few miles southwest of Fayetteville. At Prairie Grove, the Confederates can attack and destroy Herron's force as it crosses the meandering Illinois River. In the early morning hours of December 7th, 1862, the men of the Trans-Mississippi Army marched briskly to Prairie Grove, hoping to beat their Federal counterparts to the vital intersection. Leading the advance, Marmaduke drives back several Federal cavalry units picketing the roads. But just as Marmaduke continues his pursuit across the Illinois River, he runs straight into Herron's approaching column on the Fayetteville Road. Shocked to see Herron so near, Marmaduke pulls his men back and sets up a defensive line atop Prairie Grove. Chasing after the rebels, Herron advances to the Illinois and forms his 3rd Division along its banks. Colonel Daniel Houston Jr., commanding the 2nd Division in place of Totten, trails behind as his men are further away from the battlefield. For now, Herron is all alone to face Hindman's entire army, just now arriving on the field. If Hindman attacks now, he can smash Herron and drive his defeated troops into Houston's advancing column. But just as his plans are coming to fruition, Hindman loses confidence in himself. At 10 a.m., unsure of the actual size of Herron's force and worried about Blunt attacking his rear, Hindman sends Frost's massive division, more than half the army, towards Cane Hill, while only dispatching Shoup's infantry division with Marmaduke's cavalry to attack Herron. But once Shoup reaches Prairie Grove, he holds his men back, contrary to Hindman's order. Shoup, impressed by Prairie Grove's natural strength, writes, "At a glance, I was struck with the natural strength of the position and its adaptability to the purpose of defense. However, despite its defensive capabilities, the denseness of the vegetation proves to be very difficult to position artillery, maintain coherent lines, and watching for incoming attacks." After deploying Frost's men, Hindman rides over to see the progress of Shoup's attack, but as he nears a hill, Hindman finds his men hunkering down atop Prairie Grove. Frustrated, he's about to order the attack when he sees more Federal infantry approaching. With a numerical advantage now lost, Hindman leaves Shoup and Marmaduke to defend the wooded grove. This approaching column is Houston's 2nd Division arriving to reinforce Herron. With the Confederates holding their position on Prairie Grove and refusing to move, the momentum is now up for grabs. Eager to get into action, Herron drives his division across to Illinois and begins blasting away at the stationary rebels, who, with their lack of powder and antiquated pieces, are unable to respond effectively. For hours, the Confederates can do little in response to the incessant barrage of Federal artillery. Colonel Dandridge McRae, who survived the furious Federal bombardment at Pea Ridge, said that The terrible storm of shot and shell at Prairie Grove was the most destructive fire I've ever experienced. Pleased with the effectiveness of his artillery, Herron believes it is time to send the infantry forward. Believing only Confederate cavalry is present atop Prairie Grove, Herron is confident that his division alone can take the hill. Herron's division consists of Bertrand's Wisconsin Brigade and Orm's Brigade of Illinois and Iowa troops. At 1:30 p.m., Herron sends his 2 brigades across Borden's wheat field towards the grove. As they advance, they are peppered by skirmishers and artillery that belch fire atop the hill. Unnerved, the 19th and 20th charge the rebel guns and take them without any loss of life. Reforming after relishing a bit of conquest, the Federals scale the slope. With Fagan's Arkansans positioned on the natural crest of Prairie Grove, neither side can see the other until the Federals reach the top. Once the Federals come into view, the 2 sides unload furiously upon each other. On the Federal right, the 20th Wisconsin braves the attack, but its position in a ravine proves hard to manage. On the other flank, the 19th Iowa reaches the Borden house but finds itself in a pincer between the 22nd and 29th Arkansas Infantry, rising up to unleash their fire upon them. Hit on multiple sides, there is little the Iowans can do. In the middle of the fighting, the 19th Lieutenant Colonel, Samuel McFarland, is killed instantly when a bullet enters his chest. William Clayton, a private who luckily survived the ordeal, wrote that it was a perfect slaughter pen into which we were led. In a bad fix, the 2 Federal regiments flee the field. Calling roll after the battle, the 19th Iowa would find to their horror that they lost 200 of the 482 men who had marched into the slaughter pen that was the Borden Orchard. Encouraged by the repulse and without orders, the Arkansans charged after the fleeing foe. Despite Fagan wanting his men to stay on top of the grove, they flood down in pursuit of the Bluecoats. Luckily for the retreating Federals, their prepared artillery mows down swarms of men with canister, sending the survivors scrambling back towards the rebel line. Witnessing the sudden reversal of the Confederate counterattack, Herron declares, "Never was there more real courage and pluck displayed, more downright hard fighting done, than at this moment by Faust, Backoff, and Boris." With the defeat of Herron's division on the right flank of Prairie Grove, it is now up to Houston's men of the 2nd Division to take the fight to the rebels. Before Herron's ill-fated attack, Houston was ordered to support the 3rd Division, but now, with it broken, his division stands alone to face Hindman's Trans-Mississippians. To fit his needs on the field, Houston reorganizes his division to a single brigade, lining up the 26th Indiana and 37th Illinois in the first rank, while holding the 20th Iowa back as a reserve. With his command ready, he crosses Crawford's Prairie and falls in the wake of the retreating rebels. Passing over the carnage of the earlier fight, the 26th Indiana attacks the far right flank of Hindman's line, where Colonel Joe Shelby's dismounted Missourians await their advance. Seeing only a single regiment marching forward, Shelby launches his Missourians against this lone unit. Unable to withstand Shelby's attack, the Indianans flee the field in complete chaos. On their right flank, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Black's 37th Illinois advances toward the Borden house, just like their comrades in the 19th Iowa did 30 minutes before. Reaching the Borden Orchard, the 2 sides trade volleys furiously, but, unable to effectively maneuver, the fighting degenerates into a point-blank shootout. Alone and outnumbered, the 37th struggles to hold their position in the orchard. Amidst the fighting, Black, who already has a wounded right arm, has his left arm smashed by a Manet ball. Unfazed, the colonel remains with his regiment despite his inability to use his arms. Unable to match the firepower of the Confederates, and witnessing the comrades run as well, Black orders his regiment to retreat. Swiftly complying, the Illinoisans run for the rear. 31 years after the battle in 1893, a 54-year-old Black receives a Medal of Honor for gallantry shown while leading his regiment against a superior foe. Just like Herron's earlier fight, bravery alone is not enough to overcome the numerical superiority the Confederates hold. Seeing the Federals retreat once again, Fagan's men launch another counterattack in the wake of the retreating Federals. Turning around, the 37th Illinois, along with supporting artillery, shreds the charging rebels. Watching the counterattack unfold, Black wrote, "Our revolving rifles kept playing, and one another fell, and one another fled back to the cover of the wooded hill." Once again decimated by the powerful Federal artillery, Fagan's men limped back to their line. Despite a battle raging on the front, the Confederates seemed to be lacking their commanding officers. When the fighting first started around 1:30 p.m., the Confederate division commanders apparently vanished at the very moment they were needed the most. With no ranking officers on the ground able to guide the units in their fight for the Grove, the rank and file are left to depend on their regimental and brigade officers to control the movements on the field. A lack of a guiding hand, especially as the battle continues to grow ever larger, will be a major hindrance while trying to take advantage of every Federal repulse. Meanwhile, further right, Shelby's Missourians try their own attack to take the Federal artillery, but are likewise shredded in their attempt. Though the Confederates have succeeded in defending their hilltop fortress against repeated Federal assaults, they have been similarly thwarted in their own attempts to launch counterattacks against the Federal lines. By 4 p.m., the Battle of Prairie Grove, first intended to be an overwhelming Confederate assault upon Herron's advancing columns, has deteriorated into a mess of charges and countercharges. For now, the two sides, drained from going up and down Prairie Grove, are locked in an exhausting stalemate. The Federals, defeated twice in their attempt to storm Hindman's fortress, are gloomy as the prospect of defeat looms over them. However, just as all hope seems to be lost for the weary men of the Missouri Division, Blunt's Kansas Division is spotted arriving on the battlefield from the west, eager to face Hindman's stubborn rebels. Earlier in the day, while Blunt is bracing for the impending Confederate assault upon his position at Cane Hill, he sends his cavalry out to watch in all directions. Probing the area, they discover that instead of marching towards Blunt, the Confederates are moving north towards Prairie Grove. When Blunt realizes that Hindman is trying to turn his northern flank, he decides to head directly towards Fayetteville and link up with Herron's approaching column before the rebels arrive. At 10 a.m., Blunt's Kansas Division leaves their fortified position and heads towards Fayetteville, unknowingly towards Hindman's army, who had severed his direct route to Herron. Luckily for Blunt, his vanguard moves north towards Ray's Mill and away from Frost's waiting division south of Prairie Grove. Hearing the boom of the cannon off in the distance, Blunt rushes his Kansans immediately overland towards Herron to support their embattled comrades. Advancing overland, the various Kansas and Indian regiments race each other to see who can reach the battle first. By 3:15, after almost 5 hours of non-stop marching, Blunt reaches the severely thrashed Missouri Division, which is holding on for dear life along the Illinois River. When word reaches Herron and his men, loud cheers can be heard as Blunt and his Kansans finally come to their aid. Flooding into Crawford's Prairie, Blunt's units form a battle line near the Viney Grove Road. With the arrival of Blunt's Kansas Division, the Army of the Frontier is finally reunited, which has been separated since Schofield's departure almost a month prior. This merger brings the Federal Army up to 9,000 men, narrowing the manpower gap with the ragtag Confederate Army. Once Blunt's men are in place, they unleash their powerful batteries, bombarding the rebels who duck for cover. Despite having the edge artillery, Blunt realizes it will take brute force to drive the Confederates off their hill. At 4 p.m., Blunt unleashes Colonel William Veer's colorful brigade of whites, blacks, and Indians. However, due to the erratic shape of Blunt's line, Veer's brigade advances in two groups, with a large gap in between. The 1st Indian Home Brigade on Veer's left, along with the 20th Iowa, left in the field by Houston's retreat, advances toward Prairie Grove. Before these men can reach the slope, they are surprised by an impromptu rebel assault. Spurred on by Colonel Robert Shaver, the men of McRae's brigade launched the first organized Confederate assault of the day. Outflanked and outgunned, the Federals retreat back to Blunt's line. Swarming ahead in the Federals' wake, The rebels charge forward but are hit in the face by Blunt's vast array of batteries. One Iowa officer wrote, "From this terrible artillery fire, the rebels recoiled all along their whole line, taking up positions further back in the timber." As Veer's left is thrown into chaos, his right advances steadily towards Hindman's position. Consisting primarily of veteran Kansas troops, Blunt hopes these men will be able to push Hindman off the heights. But before the Federals could even reach the hill, Brigadier General Mosby Parsons, who just finished lining up his men after their march to the battlefield, leads his Missourians against the advancing Bluecoats in the largest organized counterattack of the day. The two sides meet at the base of Prairie Grove and begin unloading their muskets at each other. In this stand-up fight, neither side can do much but shoot right ahead into the enemy ranks. Blunt, just behind his line, reported that the fighting raged furiously and without a moment's cessation along our entire front. With light fading fast, Parsons becomes desperate to force a decision and orders his Missourians to charge. Letting loose a wild yell, the Missourians surge toward the blue line. Unable to withstand the longer rebel line, Veer's men give ground until they reach Blunt's array of artillery. Once back with the guns, the infantrymen turn around and mow down the charging rebels. At 5 p.m., with the sun below the Boston Mountains, a long shadow begins to form over Crawford's Prairie. It is now or never for the Confederate attackers. With desperation coming to a head, Parsons commits every unit possible to land a decisive blow against Blunt. However, as the last vestiges of light disappear, Blunt's thin blue line is far from breaking. Holding firm, the Federals beat back every unit sent against their line. Parsons' rebels, eager to see their Missouri homes once again, are torn to shreds as they try to get near Blunt's artillery. A soldier in the 11th Kansas Infantry wrote, "The Indiana gunners sent grape and shell at the rebels with a most furious rate, and literally mowed them down." Unable to get near the Federal line, the decimated Missourians limp back up the hill in the consuming darkness. With no more light available, and both sides thoroughly exhausted from the afternoon fight, the Battle of Prairie Grove comes to a close. Though the Confederates have stoutly defended their hill from repeated Federal assaults, they were defeated in turn with every counterattack. The biggest problem that handicapped the Confederates at Prairie Grove was the lack of any ranking officer commanding the battle, and instead relying upon junior brigade officers to control movements. Compared to the rebel counterparts, Blunt, Herron, and Houston performed admirably, as they handled each portion of the battle with skill and resilience. Ultimately, Blunt's timely arrival tipped the battle in favor of the Federals. Just like the battle, the casualties turned out to be fairly even. After 7 hours of attacking and counterattacking, the Federals lost 1,251 men, a casualty rate of 14%, compared to the Confederates, who lost 1,317 men, a rate of only 11%. Even though the casualties are roughly equal, Hindman lost too many men he could ill afford. In a battle that Hindman and the Confederates desperately needed to win, it turned out to be a bloody stalemate. Hindman's bold gambit to rid northern Arkansas of the Federal host has failed. The best he can do now for his army is retreat. Hindman realizes that his exhausted, poorly supplied soldiers will not be able to face another day of fighting. With no reason to persist north of the Boston Mountains, Hindman orders to retreat back to Van Buren, where his army set off with high hopes of victory only a few days before. As the order filters down, the rank and file are shocked by the turn of events, as many believe they have won a great victory. Reflecting after the battle, Hindman told Holmes, "I am very proud of my troops, but not satisfied with myself. I find that I did not press the enemy as vigorously as I ought. The tremendous responsibility made me timid." Though tactically a stalemate as neither side held the advantage, Hindman gave the Federals a strategic victory with his decision to withdraw south. On December 8th, the day after the battle, the Federals find that their foe has limped away from the field. Knowing that his depleted army is in grave danger of being attacked as they make their way to the Boston Mountains, Hindman cleverly requests a truce to prevent any surprise attack. When the request arrives, Blunt dutifully accepts. Around 9 a.m., Hindman, Marmaduke, Blunt, and Herron meet at Hugh Rogers' house to hammer out the terms of the truce. After discussing the treatment of the wounded, the final order is to select a suitable name for the battle, which both sides agree to call Prairie Grove. The Battle of Prairie Grove is the only battle in the American Civil War where the name is christened by the mutual agreement of the two opposing sides. Due to the defeat at Prairie Grove, Hindman retreated to Van Buren, reaching the river town 4 days after the battle. With his army incapable of any major efforts again for the rest of 1862, Hindman moves the Trans-Mississippi Army south of the Arkansas River to Fort Smith to regain its strength. Meanwhile, as the Federals under Blunt and Herron gather their strength in Fayetteville, alarming news arrives from Curtis on December 23rd. Schofield, who has recovered from the severe illness that left him bedridden, is on his way back to rejoin the Army of the Frontier. Blunt, the ever-audacious commander, desires to take one last swing at the rebels before Hindman retreats further south, and Schofield returns to take command. With Herron on board, the two commanders launch a raid against Van Buren. After 5 days of traveling through the Boston Mountains, the Federals reach the vacated river town. Once they arrive, they hold a military parade and set fire to anything of military value. Well aware they cannot stay in the town for long, Blunt and Herron briefly cross to the south side of the Arkansas River and then return to Fayetteville. Shaken by how easily the Federals can march through the mountains, Holmes orders Hindman to retreat further south to Little Rock, giving up their toehold in the north. With the demoralizing defeat of the Confederates at Prairie Grove and the devastating raid of Van Buren, the Federals broke the Confederate hold over northern Arkansas, forcing the majority of their units to retreat to the south side of the Arkansas River. Hindman, who's attacked on all sides for his defeat, is sent back east to rejoin his old comrades in Bragg's army after the loss of Arkansas Post in early 1863, while the remaining Confederates fortify Little Rock in anticipation of the eventual Federal march upon the state capital in the spring of next year. Meanwhile, the Federals, with Schofield finally back in command, assert their dominance over northwest Arkansas and hunker down as the winter months prevent any large-scale movements. Tired to the bone of marching, counter-marching, and fighting across the width and breadth of the Ozarks, those who are left in the Trans-Mississippi Theater allow the winter months to pass before picking up the war once again in the spring of 1863.